Hello everyone, this is Mohammad from Python Ninja YouTube channel, and in this tutorial we will learn together how can we assign default value for data class attribute. So as what we described in the previous tutorial, the data classes use class attributes to represent their instance attribute, and attributes are initiated with default values. So let us start coding directly from data classes. I want to import data class, and I want to use the decorator, okay, of the data class. So we use data class decorator now, and the class I want to build similar to what we did in employee, okay, and I will have name for this employee as it will be in a type of string, and I will have address, okay, and it will be also, it will be in a type of string. So if we want to assign a type for any attribute, we use command in the representation of that data type. And I want to use also married, and this married will also be in a boolean because it will be married true or false. And I can assign, for example, true. If I want to have, for example, age, and this age will be integer, and it will not be float, of course, and is the default age value. So if I suppose that I have default value, let us suppose this will be 10 or not 25, not 10, just to be in a context. And we can define make object directly or make instance, okay, and when I make the instance for me, I want to recall the employee class, and I want to give it the name, okay, and I want to give the address, for example, Mr. Miss Lam, for example, and I want to print the int1, okay, which is the instance, and I want to finally call that make object function. When I call, I have really very primitive error here, and when I recall the function that will create the instance to me, and I see here my name, my address, and initially it inserted the other attributes, okay, and it started the attribute or initiated the attribute with the initial values. But what if I will also include in the attributes like list of emails? Suppose that I have data, and in the data there is an attribute that comprises a list of emails. For example, I can say, for example, emails, and these emails will be of a type list, okay, and this list will be list of a string. Remember that to indicate list of a string and to identify list of a string, then you use brackets and str, and suppose, and you will, for example, give ma@mm.com, for example, okay, and this should be equal, not a colon. And now when I execute this, as you can see here, I have the default email for me has been inserted, okay, here. But the challenge that we have, if I have another instance, I have emb2, for example, and this will come from employee, and I will have, instead of Mohammed, I will have Mira, and I will have, for example, Milan as an address, and I will say false for the marriage, and I will say here age, for example, will be 30, and I will not, I do not need to update the default email. So the problem here, when I print that instance, which is emb2, okay, then I will see that, however, the Mira, I didn't like update her email, or I didn't assign to her an email, but my email, or the email that is given for the first user, which is the default email, has been also inserted among the other instance. So this default email will be like distributed among all instances we make, and that's not correct to have a default email. Instead, we will find a way now to assign default value for the list. Okay, remember that we assign here the default value for the material status if it's true or false, and we follow the same way to another primitive data type. For example, for the integer we did the same. For the string we can give like default thing, okay, or for the address or for whatever you want. This is like typically followed for the primitive data type, but for other data structure like list, we must follow another method or another procedure to assign the default value. In data classes module, there is field. What is field? Field is a function that allow you to identify the type, okay, of each field. So this is considered in terms of data structure field, and this is field. For the primitive data type like integer, boolean, float, okay, or string can be assigned in this way. But for non-primitive data structure like list, we will use field as a function to identify specifically what is the type of the of this data field. Okay, so I will have list of string will be represented the email, but it will also use the field function to identify more about the field. Inside the field, there is a default factory argument, which is a function, and by this default factory, I can pass this to this default factory, okay, and it will identify this field as an empty list, okay. So if I execute this, I will see here my emails become empty. I have no default email, but I have here an empty list of emails, okay. Again, to assign a default value for any primitive data type like integer, boolean, string, or float, we follow what we did for material status and age. But for non-primitive data structure like dictionary, like tuple, like list, we will follow this line by using field. When we import the field function or method from the data classes module, and we use from this field, we have another argument which will identify to me the exact type, okay. So remember here, we use default factory to identify the main field type, okay, and or sorry, the main field, the default value of the field. So the type is identified using a list of string, okay, but the default value here is assigned by field function, in which we have another function, okay, that will identify the default value. Sorry if I said that the type, but the default value of this field. And now we can, for example, identify whatever we want. For example, I will also add true, otherwise it will, I have to identify value for this material status, okay, and for the age to be able to reach to the email addresses. And I will say, for example, here we have the email addresses. These are list, for example, ma@ma.com, and I will have also another email address, for example, ab@ab.com, and for this here we only have one, mi@mi.com, for example. And when we run this, you can see here I have my own emails and she have her email, because I identified the field, okay, which is email field, identify the type is a list of a string, and the default value coming from the field, and this field is taken from the default factory, okay. Now what if I want to What if I want to identify, for example, another field here that will show me the ID? Remember that the default factory is a function, not a data type. So what exists before after the colon directly is the data type, okay? But what exists after the equal sign is represent the either the default value or the function that identifies the default value. So default factory is a function, not data type like integer or string or boolean. Now let us identify a new function, but I will put it in the top here, that will generate to me like ID randomly. So I will import random just to identify the random seed for that ID, not to change the ID every time. And I will have string, and I will use random dot choice to select from random dot choices the ID range. And I will also identify first, before identifying, I will set random seed. Okay, I prefer to use 42, and or whatever you want to select. It's free of choice. I want to identify, for example, generate ID, and this will does nothing, but it will return to me, okay, the join, okay, of what? The join of random dot choices. It will select to me. Let us consider we want to build a ID with 7 digits, and then we will use, I will also use from the string dot ASCII uppercase, okay, and I will pass here the k, okay, equal 7 in case in view of that I want to generate randomly 7 an ID with 7 random uppercase, okay, uppercases. Let us just blend to see. Yeah, I have here the first ID when I call the function. If I call the function another time, then I will have another ID here, okay? And you can see if we run many times, we will have the same ID here because I use the random seed. So if I want to integrate this function, which will give me an ID or unique ID for each instance, okay? So I will go here and I will say ID will be in a type of string, okay? Because usually passwords are a string in this case, and I will use also the type of the field. So this field, which is ID, which is from type string, I will identify the default value, and this default value will come from the default factory. The default factory for this will be the generator ID. Remember, when you call a function, okay, or when you assign a function to argument, okay, this argument will be, for example, the function, okay, and here is the design function we have. When we call a function and assign the function to the argument, we remove the parentheses. Again, when we call the function, and this should be equal, not column, when we call a function, okay, and this function will be called inside another function, or will be assigned, okay, by an argument like this, the parentheses should be removed, okay? Now, if I execute this, then I will see that ID is already created and assigned. Even I didn't give that ID inside the instance itself. This is the power of the data classes, that what attributes you will have here that come with the default value, then it will be assigned here. Remember these important things, that the data class can comprises the default value for the primitive data type. We can use this approach by using the normal assignment. But if you have non-primitive data structure like list, okay, or if you want to like consider the value from a function, then you must identify field, or you must use field from the data classes, and inside field you have to change the default factory okay, or assign the default factory based on the value of the default factor will come from the function or from the list. When you assign a function to an argument, remember to remove the parentheses. This is called function calling, but this is called, okay, the argument assignment. And now what we did so far is to create a data class and give default values for the some attributes. And in case, suppose that you want to embed the user who create this instance from manipulating or changing some important keys or some important IDs, for example, then what we will do here, we will go to the field, and in the field there is the init, and it will be designed to be or will be set to be false. And what does that mean? If I use init equal false, okay, equal false meaning that we will not consider ID as part of the constructor, okay, or we will override the init, okay, of the data class. Again, this data class decorator is considered as a main class, okay, and we submit this to this data class, and this data class will extend the functionality, okay, of this class. And we want to override this ID. We will not consider ID now to be a part of the constructor and the data class here. And to do that, we just say init is equal false, and now we will not be able to change the value of the ID because we enforce ID to be outside the data class. So we enforced it to be outside the constructor of the data class decorator, and we can do this verification. For example, I can use the gender set attribute. We introduce, not delete attribute. We learn together how to handle or how to deal with set attr, okay, or set attribute. And the special method section, please go back to special method tutorial to see how the set attribute is used. And general set attribute is used within the class to see each time you set attribute, okay, the value. So it will print to you the attribute and value you set. But in case if you will try to change the ID directly, so if the thing that you want to identify is ID, okay, and that ID is okay, and this has attribute, I want to check if this class, okay, if self, okay, has attribute that called ID. Again, this line will automatically check each attribute and corresponding value, each attribute, the name and the corresponding value, the address and the corresponding value, okay. And now if you set this attribute to be ID directly, okay, and at the same time this class has attribute, this class, meaning that self, when I use self like this, meaning that this class employee has an attribute equal ID. So if you try to touch this ID, then an attribute error will be raised to you. Attribute error, and it will show to you that cannot change an ID. Okay, again, set attribute is a gender or a special method that is used to show to you what the attribute that set and what the corresponding value automatically, okay, when we create the class. Now, if from outside you will set ID, okay, and at the same time the self has attribute called ID. What is the meaning of the self? Is the class itself has an attribute is called ID. then show me this error. Else, then just go to the super of this employee and use this set attribute just to see the key, the default key and default value, which are the value, which is the attribute and the value of the attribute. So this will be active only if you will try to change the ID from outside, and this will be active only as a default route in which the set attribute will be activated just to see to check that each attribute this is only to see or to check that each attribute that has been modified other than the ID. So we just checked that we don't need or we just restricted that or the way to modify the ID. So we don't need to touch this ID. So if I want to go, for example, for employee 2, which is the instance, for example, .name, and this name I want to go from Mira, for example, to Russia, okay, then as you can see here, we have an error here. We have the error in the syntax itself, because here we have the error cannot change ID. Why? Because already ID is set as an attribute among both the classes, and it is exit. So now ID is exit by default. So each time we will run the code, because ID will be exit here and will be exit in this class, then we will have this error. But if I use like this, if key, it will equal ID. So that was mistake that did by my hand, and we learn now how to handle this error. But if we run this, now we have no problem. So Mira has been changed to Russia, and we modify that. So in this case, for each attribute that I will set from outside, set attribute will work as normal by using this this line. But if the key meaning that if I say ID will equal whatever ID I will have, for example, if it will be like this, then the message will show to me cannot change ID, because ID is set to be false, is not considered as part of the constructor. Then I set the set attribute a special method in which we can add the condition not to change the ID from outside. And this is because for some property or for some attribute we prefer to keep them without touch, and usually for the unique ID or unique identifier, this should be remain without any touch. Okay, and that's for today's tutorial. In the next tutorial, we will learn together how can we manipulate these attributes and try to build a new attribute or generate a new attribute from the already existing attribute to have more detailed data. Thank you for this contributing to this tutorial, and please don't forget to share this video among your